You make $61,000 a year. Your coworker makes the exact same. Same offer letter, same start date, same gray cubicle 2 rows apart. 10 years later, you're worth $640,000. He's worth $11,000. Nobody at the office knows either number. They just know he got a new truck this spring. It started with a coffee. Not a metaphor, an actual coffee. Your first week at the company, a logistics firm outside Charlotte, there was a vending machine on the 3rd floor that did coffee for $1.75, and a Starbucks 2 blocks away that did the same coffee, roughly, for $6.40. Your coworker, Tyler, walked to the Starbucks every morning. You walked to the vending machine. $9 a day. That's the whole decision. Not a strategy, not a spreadsheet. Just a guy who liked the walk, and a boyhood who didn't think $6.40 was worth thinking about twice. $9 doesn't sound like anything. That's the whole design of it. If it sounded like something, people would notice. You both got hired the same week. Same starting salary, $61,000. Same 5-day onboarding, same laminated parking pass. From the outside, there was no difference between you at all. 2 new hires in their mid-20s, both a little nervous, both bringing leftovers to lunch the first week because neither of you had figured out the cafeteria yet. By week 3, Tyler had stopped bringing leftovers.
He found a sandwich place near the office, the good kind, the kind with hand-cut fries and a chalkboard menu, and he started going there 4 days a week. $14, $16 with a drink. It made sense. He was 24, he had a paycheck now, he'd earned the right to eat something that wasn't reheated rice. Nobody would call that reckless. Nobody did. You opened your HR portal that first week and did something Tyler never opened the tab for. You enrolled in the 401k at the full match, 4%, and you set up an automatic transfer of $140 every payday into a Roth IRA 2 days after the deposit landed, into a plain S&P 500 index fund. It took 11 minutes. You didn't tell anyone. There was nothing to tell. That was the entire fork in the road. $9 a day on coffee, $16 a few times a week on lunch, 11 minutes on a form. Nobody in that office could have looked at the two of you walking in that first month and guessed which one of you had just made the most important financial decision of your adult life. By month 4, Tyler leased a Jeep. Not flashy, just newer than what he had. Dark green. $410 a month. He pulled into the lot with it on a Monday, and 3 people complimented it by lunch. You parked the same Civic you'd had since junior year of college, the one with 97,000 miles and a check engine light that came on intermittently and meant nothing, according to the mechanic, who you paid $40 to confirm that. Here's the part that matters. None of Tyler's decisions were stupid. Not one of them, individually, would make a financial advisor flinch. A sandwich, a coffee, a reasonable lease on a reasonable truck. This isn't a story about someone blowing money on something absurd. It's a story about what happens when every single choice, made independently, in isolation, each one completely defensible on its own, all point in the same direction at the same time for 10 years straight. The math is almost insultingly simple, which is exactly why nobody does it. $9 a day, 5 days a week. That's $45 a week, about $2,340 a year. Add the extra $10 a day difference between his sandwich shop and your leftovers, 3 days a week. That's another $1,560 a year. Round it down, call it $3,200 a year in small, defensible, completely normal lifestyle choices. Not dramatic ones, just the ones that look like nothing. If that $3,200 a year had gone into an index fund instead, averaging the historical market return of around 10%, starting at 24, by 34, it would be worth roughly $51,000. By 44, it would be worth somewhere north of $200,000. Nobody warns you that the $9 isn't $9. It's a multiplier on a decade you haven't lived yet. You didn't know any of that math the first week. You just didn't feel like walking 2 blocks for a coffee you could get downstairs. That's the whole origin story. There's no discipline in it. There's barely a decision in it. That's what makes it dangerous to ignore and impossible to brag about. Year 2, Tyler got a $4,200 raise. He told 3 people about it at lunch, the good lunch place, where he was now also covering a coworker's tab some Fridays because that's just what you do when things are going well. The raise lasted about 5 weeks before the Jeep payment quietly increased. He traded up to a newer model with lower mileage, and the difference between the old payment and the new one ate roughly half of it. The other half went toward a vacation to Outer Banks that everyone on the floor heard about for 2 months afterward. You got the same raise. $4,200. You didn't tell anyone. You increased your Roth contribution by $80 a payday and left the rest where it was. There was no vacation story. There was nothing anyone could ask you about at lunch because there was nothing visible to ask about.
By year 3, something started happening that neither of you could see yet because it was happening in a number on a screen that nobody else was looking at. The index fund wasn't doing anything exciting. It went up some months, down others, the way it always does, the way it's supposed to. But the contributions kept landing. Every 2 weeks, $140, then $220 after the raise, automatic, untouched, compounding quietly underneath a life that, from the outside, looked identical to Tyler's. Same cubicle, same stand-ups, same Friday email about parking lot repaving. Year 5 is when the gap stopped being invisible and started being structural, even though it still looked the same from across the office. Tyler's credit card, the one that started as a backup for the months the Jeep payment and rent collided badly, was sitting around $4,800. An amount he wasn't panicked about, just an amount that existed quietly in the background of every month, getting paid down to $3,900 and back up to $5,100 depending on what happened that quarter. Your account, the one nobody asked about, had crossed $61,000, roughly your full starting salary, sitting in an account, having been built off a sandwich nobody ate.
There's a guy at your gym, a personal trainer you've talked to a handful of times, who once asked what you do for fun, and you said you don't really spend much, and he laughed a little. Not meanly, just the laugh people give when they think you're joking, or being modest, or possibly a little sad. You let him think whatever he wanted to think. The account didn't need his understanding to keep compounding. Year 6, the stress test arrived the way it always does, without an appointment. The company announced a restructuring in October. Cardboard boxes by Thursday. You and Tyler walked out of the same building, same elevator, both holding a box of the same desk plants and the same lanyards nobody would ever wear again. Tyler had 4 days of breathing room before the Jeep payment hit, and maybe 3 weeks before the rent did. He took the first offer that came through, a role at a smaller company for 11% less than what he'd been making, because the offer letter solved a problem that had a deadline attached to it. He told himself it was temporary. It might be. He didn't have the runway to find out otherwise. You opened your accounts that same week and saw something that had nothing to do with luck. 11 months of expenses sitting in cash, and a portfolio worth more than 4 times your old salary, neither of which had announced itself to anyone, not once, in 6 years. You took 3 weeks before accepting anything. You turned down the first offer because the title was a lateral move, dressed up as a promotion. You took the second one, a role that paid 14% more than what you'd been making, because you could afford to wait for it. Nobody at the unemployment line, if there had been one, would have guessed which of you had more options. You both looked the same. Same boxes, same Thursday, same elevator down to the lobby. Year 8, Tyler texted you out of nowhere, the first real conversation you'd had in over a year since you'd switched companies. He said he was thinking about asking his parents for a loan to cover a gap. Nothing dramatic, just a few months where the math wasn't working the way it used to. He didn't know you'd quietly crossed $500,000 11 weeks earlier on a Tuesday, mid-afternoon, while sitting in a parking lot waiting for a dentist appointment, the notification arriving with the same emotional weight as a weather alert.
You didn't tell him the number. There wasn't a version of that conversation that would have helped either of you. You asked him a few questions instead, the kind nobody had asked you either back when you started. What's actually fixed? What's actually flexible? What happens if you cut the subscriptions you forgot you had? He found about $310 a month sitting in places he hadn't looked. It wasn't enough to fix everything. It was enough to get him through the gap without the loan. He thanked you. He didn't ask how you knew to ask those questions. You didn't bring it up. Year 10 arrives on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind with nothing scheduled on it except a dentist appointment you almost forgot about. You're sitting in the waiting room, phone in hand, scrolling without really looking, when an email lands from the brokerage. Quarterly summary. You almost swipe past it the way you do every quarter, but something in the preview line catches your eye and you open it. $640,000.
You sit there under fluorescent lighting that's slightly too bright, a kid 2 seats over kicking the underside of his chair, a hygienist calling someone else's name that isn't yours yet, and you read the number twice to make sure you're reading it right. There's no champagne. There's no one to tell. You close the email, and the hygienist calls your name, and you go get your teeth cleaned. You drive home in the same Civic, 187,000 miles on it now, 3rd check engine light of its life, still nothing wrong with it, according to the same mechanic, who's charged you $40 4 separate times over the years to confirm that. You don't trade it in. There's nothing it's costing you that a new car would fix. That evening, you run into Tyler in the grocery store parking lot, by accident, the kind of run-in that hasn't happened in months. He's leaning against a different truck now, a newer one, leased 8 months ago. He tells you about it for a few minutes, the trim package, the financing, and you nod along the way you always have. He asks what you've been up to. You say, not much, works fine.
You don't mention the number from that afternoon. There's no sentence that fits naturally into a grocery store parking lot that explains $640,000 sitting quietly in an account that nobody, including the hygienist who just cleaned your teeth, will ever know about.
You drive the rest of the way home with the windows down. Nothing about the day looks different from the outside. The mail is the same, the fridge needs groceries. Tomorrow there's a 9 a.m. meeting neither of you is excited about. Here's the part that doesn't fit into a parking lot conversation. The part that took 10 years to actually understand, instead of just believe. The $9 was never about the coffee. It was never really about the sandwich, or the Jeep, or even the 11 minutes it took to fill out a form in your first week. It was about which decisions you let repeat without examining them, and which ones you decided quietly, once, to automate before you had the chance to talk yourself out of it. Tyler isn't a cautionary tale. He's not careless, and he's not behind because he's foolish. He just never had a reason to look twice at $9, because $9 has never once, by itself, felt like a decision worth making. That's exactly the design flaw the entire system depends on. You didn't out-earn him. For most of the decade, you made the exact same salary he did. You didn't out-hustle him either. There was no extra job, no 4 a.m. routine, no grinding. You just let one 11-minute decision, made in your first week, run untouched for 10 years, while 1,000 tiny, defensible choices on the other side of the office quietly pointed in the opposite direction. So here's the only question that actually matters this week. Not whether you can afford the coffee. You can. Almost everyone can. The question is what the version of that $9 looks like in your life right now. The thing that's too small to examine. The thing nobody, including you, would ever call a decision. What is it? And what would it become if you let it run for 10 years instead of one Tuesday at a time?